Hello, everybody. This is Brian from Breaking Down Security. This week is part 2 of our interview with Matt Szymanski, RVR Shell on Twitter, which you'll find out again at the end of the show. This week, we're going to talk about when you're doing pen tests, how you would find, whether or not it's a GraphQL type API, ways to protect and defend against potential attackers. What you'll find is that some of the controls in place aren't going to stop them for long, and it really only takes them out a good bit of time to suss out your schema. But you'll need to add additional controls on top of the ones ingrained into GraphQL to be able to protect against it. So we're going to go ahead and get started. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to the show. We'll give you contact information on the back end of this podcast. Also, there'll be a link in the show notes to our Eventbrite, which is Nicholas is doing a class for secure Python coding. So feel free to sign up if you are wanting to get information and learn how to code or protect your Python applications. So you can find out more about that by clicking on the Eventbrite link in our show notes. So have a great week. So one of the things that I hopefully my testers and consultants are listening to this, because we are seeing a lot more of these kinds of not typical web architectures. I mean, they're getting more typical, but sometimes we get thrown, curveballs like this. How would we know when you said you discovered it first and hacked the box? What would be some, indicators that, let's say, customer doesn't want to tell you what their architecture stack is? It's completely black box. You're walking in completely blind. Here's a website. How can they tell if it's a GraphQL implementation? Will it say it in the schemas? Should they try an introspection query if they see a REST API just because it may actually work? Or what are you looking at?
Yep. So there are some little kind of hints. Typically in the URL, you'll see the domain name, and then you'll see a query parameter, a URL parameter called query equals. And if you see query equals, I had never really seen that before in any kind of REST API architecture. And typically, you get the prettified URLs. It's like user/1/ name or something like that. So when you see that query equals, that's kind of a hint that you might be dealing with a GraphQL implementation. Try sending it an introspection query. That's a great way to find out, because it's typically, even if they have introspection disabled, which you have to do, it comes default turned on. So if they just didn't disable it, they didn't even realize that they should disable it, which it's not necessarily bad to have it enabled, but if your goal isn't to share your schema with everybody, then you have a closed source product, you have your own website, like a SaaS product or something like that, and you're not necessarily, it's not a software as a service, there's really no good reason to have introspection on. But either way, you're either going to get back, typically, introspection is disabled or not allowed. So well, hey, I'm still dealing with GraphQL here, because it's telling me that introspection is disabled. Or you're going to get a huge, big old fat blob of text back that is the schema itself.
Okay. And I'm assuming at this point, Burp Suite or some kind of web interception proxy is your friend?
Yeah. So there's a lot of different, what they call GraphQL consoles out there. And they're basically either a web application or a browser extension, or a standalone bundled as an Electron app that lets you send queries to GraphQL endpoints and manage them. And it has like a whole tabbed interface and all this really nice fancy stuff. And it will automatically in the background send an introspection query when you set the GraphQL endpoint in the system, and it will parse that introspection query and build dynamic documentation from it, which is another really great feature of GraphQL. You can build descriptions for each of your fields and objects right into the schema and build dynamic documentation about your API from it.
Right. Okay. So that makes sense because we were on an engagement. I won't tell you the company, but they had mentioned something called Graphical. And
okay, that's one of the most common consoles out there.
Right. It's an IDE from GraphQL, itself, and it's an in-browser IDE for exploring GraphQL. So that's pretty cool. And so you can use this to do testing with. I would assume are there additional plugins for this, or is this kind of a one size fits all?
It's kind of there's a bunch of different ones. They all more or less do the same thing. They just have slightly different interfaces and how to use them. I'm sure that there's technical differences on the back end. I haven't dug that deep into how the consoles actually work. They're mainly just JavaScript applications. But they, at the end of the day, they're all pretty much going to do the same thing. It's probably going to be down to personal preference, which one you want to use due to some specific feature set.
Right. You also mentioned in your talk specific endpoints that you could call. You mentioned graphical, GraphQL, GraphQL.php, GraphQL/console. These are pretty much just default endpoints. So I know we don't preach security by obscurity here. We actually had a show about it, but that would be something you would want to change if you're using graphical or GraphQL in your environment to change the endpoint names?
Well, you could, but it's going to be pretty easy to find if you have a front end hooked up to it, right? Because I'm just going to monitor the network tab of Chrome. Would be the simplest way to do it, and just see where the front end is making calls to. But if it doesn't, let's say it's a software, it's an API only, it has no front end built into it, then you're going to have to maybe do some searching to find with the, I know company XYZ has this. I hope there's not a company called XYZ out there. You might have to try a bunch of different endpoints. And, as an example, GitHub's is located at developer.github.com/v4/explorer. So it could be any one of different versions. It could have a subdomain there. It could have it. You could make it completely custom yourself. So of course, the first thing you got to do is actually find that endpoint. So you're going to want to use like WFuzz or AltDNS or Shameless Plug. The tool that I wrote will automatically search for all the ones basically listed in here to do that with. It's just going to basically enumerate through, try and find a correct response, and then hook onto that when it does find a GraphQL, either a console or the actual endpoint itself, because the console is going to be located at a different URL than the endpoint itself. If you run across the console, you're going to have to, use burp or open up Chrome Inspector, network tab, and send some requests to see where the actual console is talking to.
So you mean to tell me with all this new web technology, we're still using things like Dirbuster to find endpoints?
Because at the end of the day, it's just different implementations of the same thing. Right? Right?
Okay.
We have all this fancy technology. It still sits at a URL somewhere, right? So we can still use the tried and true enumeration techniques to try and find what we're looking for.
Yeah. Okay. Wow, it's pretty amazing. All right, and so it must be pretty hard to get any kind of verbose errors out of this, right? I mean, you don't want to obviously have that open to the world. So if you were trying to get rid of error conditions or anything like that, it's probably pretty hard to enable that in GraphQL.
So I would say more than half of the GraphQL endpoints that I've tested, just sending it garbage as a field will trigger some kind of verbose error. You can also pass a URL parameter in before the query, which is debug equals 1. And some GraphQL server implementations have this as a debug mode, and it will by default send back like full stack traces and stuff like that. So if they don't have that disabled in their production environment by accident, you may be able to just pass debug equals 1, and it's going to send back everything.
Oh, fun.
Okay.
Like what?
I said, oh, fun.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
What kind of information are you getting when you add verbose errors? I mean,
typically
is it information disclosure? Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Which, information disclosure is kind of a
Right.
not good thing.
Right.
So, let me see. Implementation errors. You were talking about, delegating authorization logic to business logic layer. We've already talked about that a little bit. Only authors can see their drafts. Some of the vulns in the wild. So Miss Berlin obviously kind of spilled the beans about the beer stuff. No, that's okay.
I skipped ahead.
Spilled the beer.
Yeah, spilled the beer, right. So HackerOne has so somebody at Shopify Cloud, I guess, had a bug bounty program through HackerOne, and this was apparently in scope. So somebody got $802 to do something.
It was two testers. So what they did was they basically used WFuzz to try and enumerate some ShopifyCloud.com subdomains, and they found that there was one called beerify.shopifycloud.com. So they realized that this was a GraphQL endpoint, and they sent it an introspection query, and they got a response back. And that introspection query listed all of the different office locations as some of the results. So from there, they started pivoting to sending queries to find out more information about each office location. And the information they got back was how much beer was left in the kegs at that particular office. So this was during a bug bounty contest that they were having. So they submitted the disclosure to them under the guise of, while this isn't necessarily a dangerous vulnerability, we could use it to know what kind of beer is your favorite and send you beer to bribe you into letting us win the prize. It was all in good fun. So as a reward, they rewarded each tester with enough cash to buy themselves 3 kegs of their favorite beer.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Okay. And so this was supposed to be an internally facing?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it was exposed to the internet.
And it was exposed publicly to the internet. And that's a perfect example of how it's just it was an accident, right? They along the way, they have, all these complex architectures, a lot of people with hands in the pie kind of trying to figure out how we want to set up all this stuff. And I guess somewhere along the way, they didn't whitelist the IP addresses. Maybe it was just easier because they have offices all over the place than whitelisting all these IPs and this and that. Somehow it fell through the cracks. But this is how these things happen.
Right. And, it goes all the way from, knowing how much beer is in the office all the way up to, migration
knowing all the users
problems
in your database.
Right. So let me see this one from, where's it at? HackerOne. Oh, HackerOne itself had a vulnerability in their own GraphQL implementation.
Yep. They've had a few.
Huh. So they're using GraphQL in a Ruby implementation. Does it matter what language you use? Is it language agnostic?
So as of now, there's a GraphQL implementation library for pretty much every programming language out there. That's mainstream. In that particular case, they were migrating to a different class-based API, and I think this story is interesting because it highlights how not having a thorough testing program in place, things can really fall through the cracks. So as they were previous to the migration, they had a field called edges. And within that field of edges, there was a field called nodes. And that nodes was, all set up correctly, had all the authorization logic in place. After they migrated to this new system, there was a field called nodes at the root level, and everyone just kind of assumed that, this is just a shortcut so that we don't have to write our queries in a way to access edges and then into nodes. And it just kind of floated past all the different checks that were in place. Well, come to find out, since this field was at the root level, it just completely bypassed all authorization logic in there.
Oh, wow. Okay. Huh.
Yeah, so they got a $20,000 payout for that one, which is pretty good.
Yeah,
that is pretty good.
Really good.
That's not bad for
Yeah.
a couple hours work. Yeah.
Yeah,
Right?
that's a lot of kegs.
That's true. So what you said, it was a shortcut down to the edges.nodes or edges nodes area.
Well, they
Is
assumed
that
that it was.
they assumed that it was right.
Uh-huh.
So this nodes was sitting at the very root level, and
Correct.
this was above where the application logic was. And that's what I'm understanding.
So it's in the schema.
Right.
So it's not that it was above where the application logic was. There was just no application logic designated to filter what was coming through that particular endpoint. And this was
Okay.
built into the Ruby library by default. So this is just one of the fields included in that. Somebody apparently missed reading the documentation of what this field actually did. Some assumptions were made, things were missed. $20,000.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So we've gone through this. We're talking about abusing the GraphQL. We talked about the finding the endpoints using WFuzz or Dirtbuster, what have you. Using the introspection for evil. You get all your available queries. What are you've got mutations in here several times. What is a mutation, and is it different than a query?
Sure. Yeah. So in GraphQL, you basically have three types of requests that you can make. You can make a query request, which you're going to get data. You're going to send a mutation request, and you're going to basically put data. Mutations are the equivalent of, hey, I want to write this new information to the database somewhere. So I'm going to mutate the data that's there with this new information in it.
Okay.
It's pretty rare to find a publicly available API out there that has mutations available for you without any type of logging in. People just don't like you writing arbitrary data to their databases. Totally understand. Sure. I wouldn't either. But the functionality has to exist to be able to update, and that's GraphQL's way of doing that. Subscriptions would be the final thing, and that's kind of like I can send a query, and it's going to open up like kind of a WebSockets type tunnel, and anytime the information that got returned to me changes on the back end, it kind of has a listener. It automatically sends me that updated data. So I'm subscribing to a query in that case.
I see. Okay. And so you have gets, puts, and mutations, which is change existing data, and puts would be like adding new lines to a database.
So which would still be a mutation. Right.
Okay.
Anytime I'm going to update the database in the back and not just retrieve data, it's going to fall into a mutation.
Oh, all right. All right. So, okay. Go ahead, Ms. Berlin.
Yeah.
Interesting. All right. So, it seems like we need to figure out how to defend against this stuff. If we're a security person, a blue teamer, and we're working in a dev heavy environment, DevOps with all the CIs and the CDs and the Jenkinses and stuff, how do we protect ourselves, or how do we protect the developers from, sending out $20,000 worth of beer to people?
Right. So, for one, don't turn on introspection responses unless you absolutely need to have them. If you have a SaaS product and your whole deal is having people integrate with your GraphQL API, then it makes sense to have it on. But let's say you're like building a SIEM solution and you don't necessarily have a publicly exposed API out there like that, and the only real interaction to your GraphQL endpoint is going to be from logged in users in their browser session. You probably don't want to have that available. While it's not necessarily horrible to have it, it does give me as an attacker a huge insight into the available attack surface that you're exposing there. So it lets me basically know, it gives me a map that I can use to write tons of different queries or mutations and send them to your endpoint to see if they're successful or not. And if they're successful, then I'm going to take those and I'm going to put them into Burp Intruder and start sending you all kinds of funny data to see if I can trigger something to happen.
Okay.
You said there was no real scanning tools or anything for this, right? Yeah.
So I wrote one.
Okay.
Yeah, right. So I wrote a tool called Shapeshifter, and what it basically does is you can pass it in a domain name, and it will search and try and locate the see if there's a GraphQL endpoint available and see if there's a console. It's going to list them out for you, and then from there, if it does find a GraphQL endpoint, it's going to send it an introspection query that's going to retrieve the entire schema for you, and then it's going to parse through that schema for you and locate and build all the different queries that, most of them anyway. Still working on it. It's alpha, but it builds a whole bunch of different queries based on that schema, and then you can also pass it in a flag for a proxy. So in that, let's say burp suite. So once it builds all of these schemas or all of these queries for you, it's going to dump them out into files so you can come back later and manually inspect them. But it's also going to try and send all the requests for them. So you're going to have all these requests being automatically sent in your burp suite there, and it listens for the response to them. And one interesting thing that GraphQL does that I've never seen another API do is it has this really handy feature called for suggestions. So if I send it a query for an object or a field that's close to the name of an object or a field that it has in there, but isn't exactly the same, it will actually suggest. It'll be like, you can't query on field XYZ, but why don't you try field ZYX or WPQ or, and it'll give me a bunch of options back that are valid fields to query for. So then Shapeshifter will, if it gets one of these suggestions back, it'll rewrite the query on the fly since it failed at using one of the suggestions until it gets a 200 response for it. So what you get in the end in your burp tool there, you'll see a whole bunch of queries sent, and you can basically just filter and like, show me all the ones that are 200s. So now you have a whole bunch of working queries already written for you in there. And then you can like send them the repeater or intruder and all your other tools start fuzzing and doing all of that stuff. So it really saves you a whole bunch of manual labor of having to parse through an 80,000 line introspection response and manually build up all of these queries with all of the different types of fields in there, and having to, make sure that I'm sending it the right type. Shapeshifter will detect the scalar type of that it's expecting from the schema and automatically generate a argument of that type to fill in for you. It also includes there's a bunch of libraries out there that let people introduce or use custom scalar types pre-written. So I went through and, wrote some functions that generate values fitting all of those custom types also. So it has a huge library of value generation functionality to try and generate dummy data to stuff into the queries for you.
Can you remove the helpfulness from your GraphQL so that you don't get, hey, would you like to, try this instead of 15 other things? You can remove that?
So this may have changed, but from when I was doing my research, I found some forums of people asking that, and it's not such an easy thing to do. This is just, there's no like set my environment variable to suggestions equals false or anything like that I know of.
Great. So
right.
Thank you, developer and creators, for being so damn helpful to the bad guys.
And that's the double-edged sword of it, right? It wants to be helpful because it's not intended to be used by bad guys, except it does get used by bad guys. So that helpfulness can be used against it.
If you're calling an API, you're doing that fairly automatically, right? Or it's a mechanical process. So APIs wouldn't know normally that these are, you didn't call this correctly. You would just get some kind of error message, right? In your logs.
It's going to be like a 400 or something like that, bad request, or you're going to get a stack trace maybe, or you're going to get a GraphQL specific error message.
Right. It just seems like that this error message bit need to be added. Maybe only on an IDE or something like that. If there was a way to restrict this only to when somebody's using a console or something like that, it would be a lot better. Can you make the error message or a category that you could say, okay, only authorized or authenticated users will gain access to that?
I mean, it's all about how you write your resolver functions, but generally you never want to pass stack trace or verbose error messages back to the client, regardless of the type
Agreed.
of API you're using, right? So that's just
Sure.
general security and best practices. We're going to catch those error messages and resolve them to a generic error message and send that back to the client. But these things get missed.
Okay. All right. So yeah, devs, don't be helpful. Remove this stuff so that it doesn't show up in somebody's web logs or anything like that. So let me see what else. Check subdomains. So it does seem like that there's a lot more work when you don't have the introspection, but you're just, eventually they will work out the schema, right? With or without test introspection.
So the workflow without introspection is it's pretty close to if you do have introspection, except there's some more steps that you have to take.
Right.
And what I'm going to basically do is the traditional approach. I'm going to get my browser up, fire up Burp Suite, proxy all the way through, click on everything on the website, and I'm just trying to trigger as many queries as possible so that I can look at the queries and responses and try and extrapolate that information from that, what their schema maybe looks like. So another interesting particularly in this case is I don't know the schema that I'm dealing with since introspection is off. So I'm going to take a legit query that I've captured in Burp Suite, and I'm going to do what I like to call parameter stuffing or field stuffing. So I'm going to basically, let's say I have hero and let's say I have user and I want to get the name back. Well, in addition to the name field, I'm going to start requesting all kinds of other fields and see if it responds with something. So in the past, I've actually requested the field password and actually gotten hash passwords back from a database, because however they've written the resolver function, it's just it's somehow mapping. They probably thought that it was really clever, and they were just like, I'm just going to take this field and then map it to the database column name, and we're good to go. So that happens, and so you can just start guessing all kinds of different fields, and you can use wfuzz or intruder with a nice word list and just start sending the same or repeater and just sending the same thing over and over again, substituting different field names in there to see what you get back.
So you mentioned that this is vulnerable to SQL injection. Could it be also vulnerable to blind SQL injection, where maybe it would take longer, like time-based, or
you can. So a feature that I'm implementing right now in Shapeshifter is to, once it gathers up a bunch of requests that it knows are good with 200 requests, it's going to write those queries out to individual files, and it's going to substitute a custom injection marker along with the generated payload for that particular scalar type that it's expecting for. So then you'll just be able to take SQL map and feed it these queries, and it's going to detect that custom injection marker and try all the different kind of SQL injections. And as far as it knows, these are just legit. These are just like any other request now.
Very nice. Okay. All right. Wow. That's great. Especially SQL map. Again, everything old is new again. So you're just using it in a different way. So that's fantastic. Let me see. Ms. Berlin, do you have any questions or anything that, from a logging point of view, this must be a nightmare for you, because, getting verbose logs could, especially if somebody's dumping schemas, it could be 80,000 lines in an error message or something, right?
Oh yeah. That happens a lot.
Yeah.
Oh,
and if you're logging requests and responses, then I could just send you a metric shit ton of introspection queries, and you're gonna just get tons of 85,000 line responses.
Which is funny about when you go into creating your own sim, you don't think about that stuff until it happens.
Right.
Right.
I'm sure there's a lot you don't think about when creating.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Oh yes. But now there's checks and balances for that kind of stuff too.
Right. I'll leave sim creation up to the experts.
I'm no expert, but thanks. I'll do it anyways.
That was your chance.
Right. Time to plug the product.
Right.
Yep. So some of the other things you mentioned about protecting GraphQL, do security-focused code reviews, obviously, and training your devs for secure coding skills. What would be some of the quick wins in regards to secure coding? Would it just be making sure that they're doing input validation correctly, or that they're reviewing their schemas to make sure that they don't end up with resource exhaustion kind of errors or authorization errors? What are we looking at there?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is taking the time to really understand the technology that you're working with, and the infrastructure that backs it up, because a lot of these vulnerabilities are nuanced and specific to particular types of code libraries that you're using, and this and that. So really understanding, this is how GraphQL works. This is where I'm supposed to implement my authorization and authentication layer. This is the best practice for doing it. This is where I'm supposed to implement my, input validation and sanitization, and still following all the best practices of using parameterized queries, things like that. And, don't send verbose error logs back to the client. All the basics that we've been trying to do since the internet still apply here. We just have to apply them in a different layer than we would in a traditional REST architecture.
And I would imagine other things like making sure you don't leave API keys or anything sensitive inside there, hence the parameterized queries,
secrets in code, especially in the case of sending error logs or stack traces back up. A lot of times stack traces contain a snippet of the code where the error happened. So you may be able to glean, an API key from that. So the creds in code bad. Don't do it. Use a secure, storage and runtime injection, all that good stuff.
Nice. And you say well-tested solutions exist. Something called GraphQL Shield. Is this just another layer of it says abstraction layer on GraphQL server permissions? What does that do?
So it's a library that you could use to do authorization authentication, right? So don't roll your own stuff. Lots of bugs have been identified in this particular project and fixed, I'm sure. So it's going to be more solid than what you have. But find something, do your research, understand the tools that you're working with, understand the technologies, understand the libraries and the nuances of how they work. For instance, that Ruby implementation. So really understand the libraries and how they should be implemented and what's actually going on under the hood there. And don't just go into it blind, because that's how mistakes happen.
Okay. So I'm looking at this. It's fairly easy to install. You just use yet another package manager called Yarn to install. It's based on something called GraphQL middleware. And it says just add permissions to your Yoga middleware's set and you're ready to go. And it's compatible with all GraphQL servers. Okay. Cool. Yeah, if you're a developer and you know what that means, shake your head. Otherwise, I have no idea what any of that means. I don't know what Yoga is and whatever that is. So, cool. Okay. Yeah, I'm looking through this. It's very, very interesting. Okay. I've got that link in the show notes to the GraphQL Shield in case your org is using that. You can go to breakingsecurity.com and get the links to a lot of this stuff. So before we started recording, you said that you had actually found a few things after the talk that you were wanting to investigate. Could you maybe expound a little bit upon that, like finding GraphQL in places they didn't expect it?
Sure. Yeah. So one of the interesting things that I found is that Magento 2 has a GraphQL implementation in their code base, and it's enabled by default. So if you find a Magento 2 website out there and you tack on a /GraphQL, you have access to that GraphQL schema. So there's a lot of complexity in there. If you read the documentation, they talk about how it's a very complex system of, validation logic and this, and that. So that's definitely something that I want to dig into and see if I can help them out and find any bugs in that particular system. But being that it's such a widely used e-commerce framework, I would personally, less is more, right? So why not just have it off by default? People probably don't even know this is on. They go through the installation. This is fairly easy to use framework for e-commerce. So there's a lot of people that aren't extremely tech savvy. They're spinning up a Magento 2 store. They install a theme. They put all their products in. They throw it up on a website somewhere, and they may not even understand what GraphQL is, or yet that it's enabled by default in their store. So
right. Yeah, it's actually I just did a search for Magento and GraphQL, and they do have it in their documentation.
Yep.
They do talk about if you run a REST call such as get /v1/products/:sku, which is the product number or whatever. It may fetch more than 100 lines of data. All you need is current price. The calls return significantly more information. With GraphQL, you could run a query against that SKU and return just that price. So
right. So that's a thing about GraphQL is there is no equivalent to let's say like select star. I can't say give me this hero ID and give me all the information that you have about it. You have to be very specific about defining the fields explicitly that you want returned to you. So this is called overfetching. And a lot of times when people are building dashboards, they have to work fast. They're under pressure. So they're like, just give me all of the data about this particular object, and I'm going to parse through it on the front end and use what I need to, and the rest can just sit there unused. So with GraphQL, you can't do that. You have to actually explicitly define, which is a huge issue if they have introspection as a pen tester. If they have introspection disabled, I can't just say, hey, I found this particular object. I'm just going to ask for all the information about that. I actually need to know the fields in there available to me. And if there's no schema to do that, that's where field stuffing comes in handy to kind of automate that kind of discovery.
Yeah. I'm just looking through some of their document. They got a lot of documentation online, even if they don't have introspection running. I mean, there's a lot of information inside. Like they're showing requests and responses about how to set up things like, set payment method on carts mutation. They have set billing and shipping addresses. So I mean, they have the exact methods on how you're going to do those things and query those things. So if you've got a cart ID, for instance, and they show the cart ID type in there, so you know exactly what to query for with regards to the formatting of that and how many characters it might be, and if it's alphanumeric or if it has special characters or whatever. So you could definitely potentially it would take you a long time, obviously, but alphanumerics, upper lower numbers, it looks like, to do IDOR, you could run through some potential cart IDs and look for that. It would take a while. Would you put rate limiting on there for like brute forcing?
Sure. Yeah, you could. So I don't want to allude to there's definitely something wrong with their particular implementation. I haven't personally had the chance to take the time to test it yet. It's definitely on my to-do list. It's pretty high on there. But I think that the real kind of thing to discuss is it's enabled by default. So I don't know if you've ever had to update a Magento website, but it's not easy. And a lot of times people don't do it because it's such a pain, especially like small, medium-sized businesses. So let's say there is a vulnerability in some particular version of their GraphQL implementation. They need to push out a fix for it. People, one, may not know they even have GraphQL, or what it is. They don't know that it's enabled. now there could be a potential vulnerability out there that they could fall victim to, and they think they're safe. They're like, well, we're not using whatever this is, right?
Right.
So little do they know that they would actually be vulnerable to that. So I like to try and err on the side with things like this of, let's turn it on instead of having everything on in the first place. Let's have it off, and you enable the things that you do want.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense there. That's very, very sensible, control, sensible security control.
Right. Because now you essentially have this unknown attack surface sitting out there. Vulnerable or not, it exists.
Yep. Wow. Oh, wow. We're super over. But I'm learning a lot here. I mean, and you're right. The Magento stuff, there may not be vulnerabilities in it, but it sounds like it's the WordPress of e-commerce sites. So
yeah, that's exactly, that's pretty much what it is. Yeah.
Oh, well, that's not a compliment, is it? So do they have a bug bounty program? Because it might be something somebody can make, some beer money on or something.
Yeah, so it's open source. I'm sure they'd be happy for you to make a pull request. I'm not sure that they would pay you for it.
Oh.
But I could be wrong. Don't quote me on it.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, so you have a tool called Shapeshifter, and there was another one you mentioned in the slides called, what was it?
Yeah, that's a friend of mine, Mike Hodges, wrote a tool called Hide and Sneak. Hide and Sneak. So
Sneak. Okay.
Yeah, so it allows you to basically from the command line spin up a cloud infrastructure in a bunch of different hosts, and you install tooling on the infrastructure in a pretty automated fashion. And one of the things it allows you to do is called domain fronting. So domain fronting is basically using a CDN and proxying requests from your attack tooling through the CDN provider. So it looks like these requests or these attacks are coming from there to kind of obfuscate your attack. So if they're whitelisting, doing IP whitelisting based on, brute force attempts, these types of things, a lot of malicious requests coming from a particular location, this is a way to bypass that. And Shapeshifter works really well sitting behind his tool like that to have kind of, your attack chain.
Mm-hmm. And if you're using multiple CDNs, then you're getting around the rate limiting that you get if you have to brute force your introspection.
Yep.
So,
and usually they don't want to whitelist like Google CDN, or they don't want to blacklist. I'm sorry, Google CDN. So it allows you to kind of do some sneaky stuff.
See, y'all are using the kindness of others to get around stuff that hurts their feelings.
That's what we do.
My defense is harder.
I want to go in and be able to block, not GitHub, what is it, Akamai, but there goes my business. So I can't protect against it. What would be okay? So since we can't block all the CDNs in the world, what will we do to protect against that?
You're asking the wrong guy.
No,
we just blocking all digital ocean.
You can't create the problem and not have a solution.
But that's what I do. That's my job.
No, it's not.
Yeah, I'm bringing the problem to light so other people much smarter than me can find a solution.
Oh, I see. Okay. Well, that makes sense, I guess. All right. So you're going to be at Texas Cyber Summit.
Yep.
How would people contact you and maybe discuss if they wanted to add to Shapeshifter, or if they wanted to, pick your brain a bit more on defense techniques? Because apparently you've already got all the attack techniques down. But how would they get a hold of you if they wanted to do so?
Sure. You can find me on Twitter at RVRSHELL, or just I'll be speaking there, so feel free to come up to me after my talk, and we can chit chat and exchange information and talk about fun security stuff.
Fantastic. Yeah, I after your talk, I felt all weird and got all sweaty in weird places, and I knew that I needed to go up and talk to you because I wanted to do that, but I was like, I don't know if he'll want to come on the show or whatever. And I was like, nope, the worst thing he can say is no. So went up, said hey, and I appreciate you coming on. And
Sure, it was my pleasure, man. I've been really excited about this. I've never done a podcast before. I was really shocked that I was invited. So the pleasure's all mine.
No, we don't have a rock star mentality here. You know, anybody. We always say that anybody can be on the show.
Well, I don't know if I should take that as a compliment or not, but thank you.
They let me on every week. So
right.
I think you messed up McAfee ever being on the show.
Oh yeah, John McAfee will probably. Yeah, probably not John McAfee. Yeah, if you've heard the pizza party that we did at DerbyCon, he's probably not high on the list. So I would love. Are you planning on giving the talk after Texas Cyber Summit? Because I know B-Side Seattle is coming up, and there's a lot of web-based companies up here that may or may not use GraphQL.
I would be willing to give the talk anywhere. I really want to spread awareness about this, and
right.
There's vulnerabilities out there. There's a lot of untested attack surface because it just hasn't been discovered. People don't necessarily know what they're looking at for a lot of times. So I'm willing to talk about it anywhere, including this show.
Yeah, right on. Let me see if B-Side Seattle has a CFP out yet. I know that we're having one it's like February or something.
Gotcha.
So,
Texas Cyber Summit is the last one that I have scheduled currently.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I don't see anything in here yet. So, I do know we had to move it last year to a week or so because of the weather, but, B-Side Seattle, I mean, there's a ton of web application development folks up here. I mean, because that's, it's Seattle.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's lovely in the wintertime. So you should come up and visit. So, cool. All right. Well, Miss Berlin, you went to DefenCon. You were at Derby. The villages were phenomenally well done. You did a panel at DerbyCon, which I was front row to see. You did 2 panels. Yeah. Oh, what was the second one?
The first one was the keynote one, and then the second one was the mistakes that we wish our users would stop making.
Right. I saw that one. That one was really good. You had Miss Hacks in there, and it was some dude. I don't know what his name was. Actually, I don't remember what his name was.
His name's Lee Neely. He does stuff with Security Weekly.
Oh, okay. And there was Miss Hacks and who are the other ladies on there or people on there?
That was a long time ago. You can't ask me to remember that.
You've slept since then. Okay.
Oh,
it was literally weeks ago.
That's true.
I've been busy. April Wright was on there, and then
that's right. Yes.
Lee's wife, Chanel.
Oh, okay. Yes, I do remember that there was some kind of like connection between the moderator and one of the people on the panel. So cool. All right. Yes, I learned a lot from that one too, because there were definitely some things that we wish that our customers and users would do. I was front row for that one. That was a really good panel as well. I only saw a handful of talks, unfortunately. That's why I'm having all the people on the podcast so that I can like bug them and ask them questions.
Yes, thank you, because I saw none.
No, I can understand that. So your village, you're doing Hackers Health is on Twitter, correct?
Yes. And
what other ways can they get a hold of you?
Personal Twitter at InfoSystir, INFOSYSTIR. And then the next physical conference I will be at is GrphCon, end of October.
End of October, okay. All right. And before we started talking, you said Miss Megan, who I saw in MeetSpace at DerbyCon and at DefenCon, yes. She's going to be at Texas Cyber Summit doing a village as well.
Correct.
Okay. And awesome. That's great. So we're both also active on Slack. The Brakesec Slack has almost 2,000 people, and we have a number of things going on there, including Matt. You might want to come on. We have a web app sec channel.
Yeah, I'll definitely join that.
Yeah, we have a bunch of different channels. It's very, I wouldn't say noob friendly because we're all noobs there, but it's very friendly to people. We have a social contract. So if RVR Shell would like to join us, he can send us a DM on Twitter or send us an email to bds.podcast@gmail.com. Don't worry, your invite's incoming, sir. But yeah, we have a book club. I think we just did. Oh crap! Which one did we just do? I think it was the Cuckoo's Egg. I think we just finished up that one. Oh no, Attacking Network Protocols is the one that we're doing right now on the European Book Club, because we have one in the Asian European region. We also have a U.S. book club, which meets James Forshaw's book, Attacking Network Protocols, as part of our summer series. And we'll be trying to pick another one very soon. I think we've got Dave Sybuck and JB going through that. They're some of our moderators as well. Ponysec is running our CTF club. He just ran. We actually uploaded a video of him last week on doing HTTP smuggling, which I found quite interesting and innovative. You can nest another HTTP request inside an existing one, and load balancers will see the first one and bypass the one in the inside, and actually can cause all kinds of issues. So HTTP smuggling is very, very interesting attack. Yeah,
you got to play with that content length header.
Yep. If you can attack it with the content length, it's pretty awesome. So yeah, we uploaded that to the Brakesec YouTube channel, so you can go and check that out. He runs through that quite a bit, and quite good. And he runs through the Hack the Box stuff as well. So he's got he does weekend CTF clubs, so you can get on and ask questions and run through various either retired boxes, or he'll help you out by asking you some important questions if you've got real questions on legit unretired Hack the Box sections machines. So anyway, now that I've stumbled over that, let's see. Brakesec, official Twitter, the Brakesec podcast is at Brakesec, Brakesec. Mr. Betcher, whose family's doing sports and stuff this time of year. So Tuesday night was volleyball, which he likes to go and be a dad and be a spectator, which I don't fault him on that. You can find him on Twitter at Betcherpwned, BOETTCHERPWNED, and he's also the lead developer and head dude for LogMD, which is a window forensics tool. You can go to log-md.com for more information on that. You can follow me on Twitter, Brian Brake, BRYANBRAKE. And so for those of you who are catching this on Wednesday, the 2nd of October, I do a local CSEC meetup in Seattle called CSEC East. And we're going to be meeting at Black Lodge tomorrow night, which will be 2 October. And if you're interested, you can come by. We're going to have some talks. Daddy Coco Man on our Slack channel is going to be talking about attacking Python 3.8. And Miss Wendy Knox Everett, who works with me at Leviathan and has also given this talk at DC Sky Talks, is going to be talking about cake and cookies, which is CAIQ and cookies. So it's like how you make sure your policies and procedures and everything are up to snuff, I believe. So if that's not correct, then I'm going to definitely learn something tomorrow night, because I had assumed that's what that is. So Consensus Assessments Initiative Questionnaire. So it's a survey provided by Cloud Security Alliance for cloud consumers and auditors to assess security capabilities of a CSP, or a cloud service provider. So we're going to learn about cloud service providers and Cloud Security Alliance stuff tomorrow night. Sounds great. Looking forward to it. And so we're on all the major podcast providers: iTunes, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio. We found out that leaving reviews is better than gold in many cases. So if you don't want to leave something in the tip jar or Patreon, which I'll talk about in a second, you can leave us a review, and that gets us more exposure, which gets us higher in the rankings for podcasts when people search for Infosec or podcasts. And you can help us out in that respect. But if you found value in the talk that Matt just gave tonight, which is more time than just the talk that he gave at Derby, so you're actually getting more content than what he talked about originally at Derby.
You can hear it better.
Oh, it's got better audio quality
you
too.
You can hear it at all.
Yeah. So if you found value in this and you go back to work tomorrow and you go, man, we got GraphQL and we suck. If we need to turn off introspection queries. So, feel free to drop a buck or two into our tip jar there over at Patreon. I'd also like to thank Josh P. and David G. for actually becoming Patreon supporters. So their support helps pay for hosting fees, the Zoom that we're using right now with Matt and Ms. Berlin, and and helps pay for time and effort to get a podcast out and build our community. So appreciate that, David and Josh. That was it for this week on Breaking Down Security. And check out our TPub store, tpublic.com/user/BDS podcast. You can get a picture of Miss Berlin's face on a t-shirt. We also
I now have that thing. Yeah, I know.
You bought that t-shirt?
My own. It was gifted to me at DerbyCon.
No, really?
Yes, and I now have my own face on a shirt.
Oh, that's kind of recursion, isn't it?
A little bit.
So, we have the podcast t-shirt on there, Miss Berlin's face. You can also grab, if you didn't make it to Infosec Campout 2019, you can also get a t-shirt of that, which will be vintage eventually. So that was it for this week on Breaking Down Security. Thank you again, Matt, for coming on the show. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
And that was, we'll have a great week. Be nice to one another, especially on Twitter and especially the current climate we've got in the world today. Take care of yourselves because you're the only you have, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Bye.